My daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "We've already decided what's best for you." Then she pulled out a folder and told me what she planned to do with my house. I didn't argue. I just asked one question and watched her confidence disappear. Carol rinsed the porcelain salad bowl, listening to the gentle hum of the dishwasher in her sunlit kitchen. For 7 years since her husband passed, she had hosted Sunday dinner for her son David and his wife, Diane. She loved cooking pot roast, setting out fresh linen napkins, and hearing about their weeks. At 62, retired after 3 decades managing medical records at the county clinic, Carol valued order, quiet routines, and family harmony. As she carried a pitcher of iced tea to the dining table, Diane did not wait for David to sit down. Diane set her fork aside, folded her hands over a sleek leather planner, and cleared her throat with practiced authority. David kept his eyes fixed entirely on his plate, carefully cutting a piece of roasted potato. "Carol, we need to go over the schedule for this coming fall," Diane said, her voice completely calm, smooth, and matter-of-fact. "With the kids starting private academy sports and my promotion at the regional logistics office, our afternoons are packed. We've already arranged everything. You'll be giving up your Tuesday book club and your Friday morning community greenhouse shifts. We need you at our house by 6 in the morning on weekdays to handle meal prep, school drop-offs, laundry, and evening tutoring." Carol paused with the glass pitcher suspended above David's cup. "Diane, my greenhouse volunteer mornings are committed months in advance. I also value my personal reading group." Diane smiled thinly, not batting an eye. "This is how it's going to be, Carol. The family has already decided what's best for everyone's resources, and your time needs to serve our household now." Carol set the heavy pitcher down on the coaster without spilling a single drop. She did not raise her voice, nor did she flinch. She simply looked across the polished oak table, meeting Diane's unwavering gaze, and quietly asked, "Who gave you the right?" Diane's smile vanished for a second before hardening into polite condescension. "David and I discussed this thoroughly last night. We are the ones managing the future of this family. You live alone in this 3-bedroom house with nothing pressing on your calendar. Your volunteer work is just a hobby, Carol. Our careers and the children's competitive schooling are real priorities. Naturally, your schedule should adapt to our needs." Carol looked directly at David, waiting for him to speak. Her 34-year-old son, an estimator for an architectural firm, merely shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He adjusted his collar and took a slow sip of water. "Mom, Diane just means we're overwhelmed. It makes the most sense logistically. You're always saying you want to support us. Supporting you when emergencies arise is very different from having my weekly life managed without my consent," Carol replied evenly. She remembered the past 6 months clearly. It had started with Diane dropping off grocery lists for Carol to purchase and deliver on Mondays. Then came the dry cleaning pickups, followed by expectations that Carol would stay home all afternoon waiting for appliance repair technicians at Diane's house. Each task had been presented not as a favor requested, but as an assigned duty. Carol had accommodated them out of motherly affection, assuming it was temporary stress. Now seeing the color-coded calendar neatly printed inside Diane's planner, Carol realized this was not a temporary favor. Diane viewed Carol's retirement not as an earned chapter of independence, but as an unallocated labor pool waiting to be utilized. "We aren't asking for an argument," Diane added smoothly, checking her wristwatch as if the conversation were already concluded. "We printed the daily checklists. We expect you at our front door at 6 sharp tomorrow morning." Carol picked up her napkin, patted her lips, and said nothing. Her silence was not surrender. It was careful evaluation. At 5:30 on Monday morning, the sunrise cast a pale gold glow over Carol's front porch. Instead of driving her compact sedan across town to Diane and David's subdivision, Carol brewed a fresh pot of dark roast coffee. She pulled on her canvas gardening apron, laced up her sturdy walking shoes, and stepped out into her backyard garden. For 2 hours, Carol weeded the tomato beds, pruned the climbing roses, and organized the seed packets in her wooden shed. Her phone sitting on the kitchen counter inside began vibrating at 6:15. By 7 o'clock, it had chimed 12 times. Carol walked inside at 7:30, poured a second cup of coffee, and checked the screen. There were 4 missed calls from Diane, 2 from David, and 3 frantic text messages. Where are you? The kids need their breakfast packed, and David has an early site meeting. Carol, you are late. Call back immediately. Carol dialed David's cell phone. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight and breathless, against the background noise of crying children and clattering pans. Mom. Where are you? Diane is furious. She had to reschedule her client briefing because nobody was here to pack lunches or drive Leo to carpool. Good morning, David, Carol said in a steady, measured tone. I am at home enjoying my morning coffee. You knew we needed you here at 6, David protested, lowering his voice as if stepping into another room. Diane told you the plan yesterday. Diane told me her assumption yesterday, Carol clarified calmly. I never agreed to it. As I stated at dinner, my mornings are mine. If you need hired childcare or a morning driver, you should begin interviewing services today. David stammered, caught off guard. Mom, we can't just hire someone on 0 notice. Then you must adjust your own morning, David, Carol replied, and gently disconnected the call. On Tuesday afternoon, Carol attended her regular book discussion at the neighborhood library before driving to the municipal greenhouse. She had volunteered there for 4 years, cataloging native plant donations and managing the seed inventory. Her decades of medical record administration made her exceptionally methodical. She kept precise physical binders, tracked supplies, and coordinated volunteer schedules with quiet efficiency. While Carol was labeling a flat of winter lavender seedlings, David walked through the glass double doors. He wore his work khakis, looking worn out and distracted. It was rare for him to visit her outside of family dinners, let alone during his working hours. Mom, can we talk outside for 5 minutes? David asked, glancing around the humid nursery tables. Carol set down her garden trowel, wiped her hands on a dry towel, and walked with him to the shaded wooden benches near the fountain. Diane is very stressed, Mom. David began, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. This morning was a complete chaos again. She thinks you're doing this intentionally to push back against her authority in the family. I am simply living by my own schedule, David, Carol answered calmly. Why does Diane believe she has authority over my daily hours? David rubbed his temples. She runs our house like a project. It's how she manages her career and the kids. When she plans something, she expects everyone to pull together. You refusing to help makes her feel like you don't care about our family's success. Carol looked at her son's tired profile. Pulling together means mutual agreement, David. It does not mean one person issues commands while another forfeits their autonomy. I spent 30 years working full-time while raising you. I never demanded that your grandmother abandon her life to manage mine. David had no answer for that. He simply stared at the gravel path visibly torn between his household pressure and the truth. On Thursday, Carol drove to the local supermarket to pick up her personal groceries. While walking down the dairy aisle, her phone buzzed with an alert from a local delivery app. Diane had linked Carol's credit card to a shared grocery account 2 years ago during a holiday baking weekend and had never removed it. A notification popped up. An order totaling $280 had just been placed under Carol's card, scheduled for delivery to David's address in 40 minutes. Attached was an automated message from Diane's profile. Picked up weekly staples for the kids since you were unavailable to shop for us this week. Carol stood by the refrigerated milk cartons looking at the digital receipt on her phone screen. The cart contained expensive specialty cuts of beef, organic snacks, and household cleaning bulk packs. Diane had not asked. She had simply processed the charge as if Carol were an automated expense account. Carol did not call Diane to argue. Instead, she opened her banking app, immediately canceled the pending authorization with a single tap, and removed her credit card details permanently from the shared profile. Next, she walked over to customer service, requested a replacement card with a new account number, and finished her own shopping. 20 minutes later, while Carol was unloading her groceries into her refrigerator, her phone rang. It was Diane. "Carol, my supermarket order just failed at checkout." Diane said, her voice sharp with irritated disbelief. "The store says the card was declined or removed." "Did you cancel it?" "Yes, I did," Carol replied, placing a carton of eggs in the door shelf. "That card is for my personal living expenses. If you are ordering groceries for your household, please use your own bank account." "It was for your grandchildren," Diane snapped. "And you and David are their parents," Carol said evenly before hanging up. On Friday morning, Carol sat at her writing desk in the study. She reviewed her monthly budget, her pension statements, and her modest savings account. Everything was in flawless order. Her house was fully paid off. Her utility bills were automated and her vehicle was well maintained. She did not owe anyone a single dollar, nor did she depend on David or Diane for financial or domestic assistance. She realized that her previous kindness had been misinterpreted as dependency. Because she was always available, Diane had assumed Carol had no purpose of her own. Carol decided it was time to establish clear, permanent structures. She drafted a formal letter of intent for her weekly schedule and printed 3 copies. It outlined the specific times she was genuinely delighted to spend with her grandchildren: Sunday afternoons between 2 and 5 and 1 planned Saturday outing per month. It explicitly stated that she would no longer provide routine weekday transportation, daily household chores, or emergency errand coverage unless a genuine medical emergency occurred. Next, Carol contacted the community center director and officially increased her volunteer commitment. Starting the following week, she would teach a twice-weekly basic computer literacy class for senior citizens, utilizing the administrative skills she had mastered during her professional career. She also enrolled in an evening pottery workshop on Thursdays. When Carol finished organizing her calendar, she felt a profound sense of clarity. She was not acting out of anger or bitterness. She was simply taking complete ownership of her remaining years. That evening, David called to ask if she was still cooking Sunday dinner. "I am hosting Sunday dinner as usual," Carol replied smoothly. "However, dinner will be served promptly at 5 and we will have an important discussion afterward." David hesitated on the line. "Diane says she has a few more items to discuss as well." "I expect she does," Carol said. Sunday arrived with cool autumn rain tapping against the dining room windows. David, Diane, and the 2 children arrived at 4:30. The children ran into the den to watch a movie while David sat quietly on the sofa. Diane walked into the dining area with a heavy manila folder, placing it prominently next to her water glass. During dinner, the conversation remained stiff. Carol served her homemade pot pie and a crisp apple salad, chatting warmly with her grandchildren about their school art projects. Diane barely touched her food, keeping her posture rigid and her eyes fixed on Carol. As soon as the children finished and returned to the den, Diane opened the manila folder. She slid 3 printed documents across the tablecloth toward Carol. "Since you've made it clear that commuting to our house every morning is inconvenient for you, David and I have found a comprehensive solution," Diane announced smoothly, leaning forward with an air of absolute finality. "We spoke to a real estate agent on Friday. The market in this neighborhood is peaking. We are going to list this house next month." Carol paused, holding her teacup steady. She looked down at the paperwork, which contained comparative market analyses and business cards for a listing agent. "You will move into our finished basement suite," Diane continued, her voice entirely confident. "The equity from this sale will pay down our mortgage and establish a private school fund for the kids. In exchange, you will have no property taxes or utility bills to worry about, and you will be right downstairs to assist with the children full-time. It solves every problem efficiently." David stared down at his folded hands, his face pale, remaining utterly silent. Diane rested her palms on the table. "We've already scheduled the appraiser for Thursday morning. This is the only practical path forward. Carol did not look at the real estate paperwork. Instead, she turned her gaze entirely toward her son. The room was so quiet that the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like hammer strikes. David Carol said, her voice calm, clear, and steady. "Look at me." David slowly lifted his head. His eyes were filled with guilt and anxiety, but he did not speak. "Did you authorize your wife to contact a real estate agent regarding my home?" Carol asked directly. David swallowed hard, glancing nervously at Diane before looking back at his mother. "Mom, the house is too big for you." Diane did the math. "With the rising property taxes and roof maintenance, it makes sense on paper. We thought having you close by would keep the family united. You thought having my house sold would solve your family's private school tuition and mortgage balance." Carol corrected him without an ounce of cruelty, simply stating the raw facts. "You sat in this room, ate the food I prepared, and allowed your wife to plan the sale of the home your father and I built, with 30 years of honest labor." Diane interjected, her voice rising slightly with defensive irritation. "Carol, you are being unreasonable. We are trying to include you in our household. You are an older woman living alone. Most mothers would be grateful to have their children manage these burdens for them." "I am not a burden," Diane Carol replied, turning her eyes to her daughter-in-law. "And this house is not an asset in your portfolio." Diane crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently against the hardwood floor. "We have already made commitments based on this plan. You cannot simply refuse to cooperate with what the family needs." Carol stood up smoothly from the head of the table. She walked over to the mahogany sideboard, opened the center drawer, and pulled out a single thin blue folder. She walked back and placed it gently on top of Diane's real estate printouts. "You told me last week that this is how it's going to be," Carol said, looking Diane dead in the eye. "You told me the family had already decided my future. Then I asked who gave you the right. You never answered, so let me answer it for you." Carol tapped the blue folder. "This property was deeded entirely into a private, irrevocable living trust 3 years ago, with the County Legal Aid Society acting as the secondary trustee. The title is, 'Clear, the taxes are paid from my independent pension fund.' And nobody, not David, not you, and not any real estate agency has the legal standing to list, appraise, or touch a single brick of this property without my personal signature." Diane's face drained of color. She looked at the legal seal on the folder, her mouth opening slightly in shock. Carol turned back to David. "David, I raised you to be a responsible, honest man who earns his own way. Allowing your wife to treat your mother like an unpaid servant and an equity reserve is a failure of character. I love you, but I will not rescue your finances by sacrificing my home, my dignity, or my time." Carol picked up Diane's real estate papers, folded them in half, and placed them neatly in Diane's hands. "You will cancel the appraiser tonight," Carol said with unwavering authority. "You will leave my house now, and neither of you will ever presume to manage my life again." Diane stood up quickly, clutching her folder, completely speechless. David looked down, utterly broken by his mother's quiet strength. By 8 o'clock that evening, the house was completely quiet again. Carol washed the remaining dessert plates, dried them with a clean linen cloth, and placed them neatly in the cupboard. There was no chaos, no shouting, and no lingering drama. She had drawn a clean line, and the boundary stood firm. On Tuesday morning, Carol began teaching her computer literacy class at the community center. 10 senior citizens attended, eager to learn how to manage online portals and digital photo albums. Carol found immense satisfaction in using her decades of administrative experience to empower others. Her life felt full, active, and distinctly her own. 2 weeks passed before David knocked on her front door alone on a Saturday morning. He did not bring paperwork, and Diane was not in the car. Carol invited him in and poured 2 cups of tea. David sat at the kitchen table looking humbled. "I canceled the appraiser that night," Mom. Diane and I had a long, painful conversation. We enrolled the kids in our local public school, which is actually very good, and we reworked our household budget to live within our own salaries. I am deeply sorry for how I acted. I let pressure make me weak. Carol looked at her son. She saw genuine remorse and the beginning of real maturity. Apology accepted, David Carroll said gently. You are always welcome in my home as my son. But our relationship will only work if you remember that I am an independent person who deserves respect. They finished their tea together in peaceful conversation. When David left, Carol walked out to her greenhouse shed. The morning sun was bright, her flowers were blooming, and every hour of her day belonged entirely to her.